We should be recording now, and here's that language in the chat. And I am very excited for our session today on communicating your program design. It's a deep dive into theory of change and logic model, which are some of my personal favorites. And I'm excited to hear what Amy and Jennifer have to share with us today. I will pass it to the two of them, our fabulous presenters. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Lou. I feel equally passionate about theory of change and logic model, so beware, folks. Thank you for joining us today for the second of our 4 webinar series on this topic of AmeriCorps grant writing, for which today's topic, just like Lou said, will be communicating your AmeriCorps program design. And before we get started, we just want to take a few minutes to do what we call building the learning environment, which we did last time too, so nothing new. Want to do some just quick introductions in the chat if you can put your name, organization, and the main focus of your AmeriCorps program, or if you're not an AmeriCorps program yet, your work as an organization. You could use the buzzwords of the AmeriCorps focus areas that we talked about last time, or just a real quick one sentence about what you all do, just so we can get to have a sense of who's on the call. Just take a minute to take those in. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself. Tag 2, like it looks like we have some education programs, some environmental stewardship programs. Thank you. Academic programs, yeah, mentoring chronically absent students, disability rights and inclusion, thanks. All right, a real diverse group of programs. All right. Thanks for sharing. Feel free to keep on sharing if you haven't had a chance yet to do that, but we'll move forward. Here's our agenda for today. Much of today will be about understanding what parts of the AmeriCorps grant go into communicating your program design, but we're going to start with a few just AmeriCorps basics and also wrap up with a few things for you to know and resources that are available to you. And we want to remind you that as we start this training today and continue throughout the session and have our other trainings that are following in March, we really want to encourage you all to submit questions you have on either the topic we're discussing right now or anything that relates to the AmeriCorps grant writing. Feel free to submit those because we'll take those and make sure we incorporate them into the future sessions if they're not applicable today. So I want to make sure that you all don't leave this time with any unanswered questions or unanswered questions that we're not going to answer at some point. So it's super important to get those questions out there so we can make sure to help address them. So feel free to put them at any time in the chat. We talked about this on our first call that writing an AmeriCorps grant requires first that you understand some of the foundation information that guides what AmeriCorps programs do and what they should be about. And in terms of the program design, it's important that we reinforce a few of those things, and we're going to talk about a few additional things that we didn't talk about last time. You may remember a visual that we showed in the first session that represents the areas on which all AmeriCorps programs should integrate as they think about their program, whether they're education, disability focused, environmental focused, whatever the area might be, all AmeriCorps programs should focus on these guiding principles that sometimes we call the legs of the stool, because if you're missing one or more legs, your stool falls over. If you have all of your legs in place, you have a strong foundation to build your AmeriCorps program. And these legs are get things done, they're strengthening communities, they're strong member experience, specifically with encouraging responsibility and expanding opportunity, and brand and core identification. And when you think about your program design and communicating in your grant application, all of these areas should be taken into consideration. while they all might not be talked about in the specific parts of the application that relate to this topic, they do come up in other areas that align closely with your program design or what we call theory of change or what we call logic model. We're going to kind of use those three words interchangeably. So program design, theory of change, logic model, they kind of all work together or are similar in their terms. The leg we will focus on primarily for this session is get things done, but we're going to also talk about the member experience side of things. Programs must be able to demonstrate, of course, a compelling community problem that through data or other information have clear activities that address the problems outlined for which AmeriCorps members can perform and be able to demonstrate impact and evidence of success through data collection and reporting. And of utmost importance is being able to demonstrate that you have proposed activities or program model that's based in evidence of success or will likely lead to success and will have the capacity to show numbers served and impacts achieved. So you have some information or evidence that lets the readers know you're likely going to be able to move the needle on the problem because your activities have some evidence behind them. Now, again, like just to talk a little bit more in detail about each one, again, first you have to be able to demonstrate that there's a problem or set of problems in your community or communities, because some of you may be in one geographic area, some of you may be in multiple, some of you may be across the state. And that's communities, it's with people, it's with environments. And do you have data you can share that really speaks to the severity of the problem and the extent of the problem? And is it compelling? Is the data recent? Is the data relevant in the current kind of time frame? And then, of course, second, you have to have that well thought out plan on how you're going to use these AmeriCorps members. At the foundation of all programs are these people called AmeriCorps members. And these are individuals that you have to recruit and select that will serve a specific period of time for a specific amount of time per their service term. So you have to figure out what activities they're doing and the dosage they're doing, what that might equate for hours and they might be serving, and then ultimately what slot type. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Then you have to talk about the service term, what sites they're going to be serving at, and the target population. Like all of these go into communicating your program design and your theory of change. And it's really important that the activities you propose for members have some likelihood of working. And then you of course, have to have that idea of what success will look like. Once your program's operated and members are out doing their really important activities, you're going to need to be able to show and report on key indicators of success. And that's your performance measures, your output and outcome, and all this kind of blends into your program design. And then, of course, over time, build your evidence. Your opportunity and challenge each year, or when you make your first grant application or recompete grant application, is to consider some important questions that help you craft your AmeriCorps program design. So, what are you currently doing that you're, not reaching the scale, scope, and reach of what you want to do? What are the problems, areas, or gaps that you're not meeting? If you could wave your magic wand, what would you want to do with these AmeriCorps members that's allowable within an AmeriCorps program? These are some really good kind of opening questions to consider. And then that would lead to what activities you want your members to do. Are any of these activities potentially unallowable or prohibited? You have to kind of do that check-in. Where would members serve? Are all my members doing the same thing? If yes, great, you talk about that. If no, you have to think about, okay, how many buckets of activities am I considering? Of those buckets, is each member doing all of them, or are like a group of members assigned to a particular bucket? How many members are you thinking about? When are they serving? In addition to where are they serving? And does all of this align with the places where you're thinking about putting members? And then based on all this information that you think through to create your program design, you have to think about what type of member makes the most sense, because you have to set your members up for success to be able to complete their hours and to earn their education award. So you all have a variety of opportunities to think about different slot types, from abbreviated time of 100 hours to full-time with a minimum of 1,700 hours. And all of this should be, based on the questions we just talked about. And you're laying out what the year or the service term might look like for the members, so you make sure that whatever slot type you're proposing, they're able to earn their hours. We have a tool that you can find in some of our On3Learn courses that we can also share after this session, and we call it the benchmark calculator. It's a tool that Jennifer created a long time ago with her program, and updates every year for other grantees to use, that helps you really map out the hours members are going to serve each day, each week, each month, taking into consideration training days, national service days, and holidays. And then once you lay it all out, you can see what hours they'll be able to easily earn, which should then help you determine your member slot type. That's the thing that's hardest, especially for new organizations that are taking on an AmeriCorps program, is figuring out that right slot type based upon hours that members are going to be able to serve in, again, a day, a week, a month. So this is a really helpful tool that we can share with you afterwards. I'm going to pause just to see if any questions came up on what we talked about before we get into the design elements. I'm not seeing any, but if anyone has any questions right now, this is your chance to ask. Right. So from this point forward, we kind of are framing some overall things that you all have to think about and some questions to consider. We're really going to now look at the main elements that communicate your AmeriCorps program design and the AmeriCorps grant. The first of which directly communicate it, and the second of which are areas in the grant application, primarily or particularly the narrative, that speak indirectly to some of the program design elements. So let's get this started. If you remember from last session, one of the main elements of the AmeriCorps grant is the AmeriCorps narrative. It can have sections like the one you see here, and depending upon each annual request for grant applications or NOFO or whatever it is that you're applying to, the sections can vary, but these are the main big sections, of which the subsections usually are the ones that are different. And as you can see, the first big section after the required executive summary is the program design. And this is typically where your energy goes to talking about your design, your theory of change, your logic model. The program design section is typically worth a large number of points in the review process and consists of a few different subsections, for which we're going to talk about the first, since this is the one that most directly relates to your program design. And I'm sharing with you all things that are based on this year's current Washington State Formula RGA, request for grant applications. But every year, these subsections and the criteria that are asked could vary, but I'm just using this since I know several of you are either considering or are applying to this one. So I'm going to use what's in this current RGA as examples for what you might talk about. Okay, so the thing that is probably the most confusing for this, and I'm going to go back to the screen for a second, is that this first subsection in program design in the Washington RGA is called community need and stakeholder engagement. There are two things that are looked at to determine the points you get. So when we look at that community need and stakeholder engagement section, they're looking at the narrative you write in this subsection and the logic model document, which is a 7-column document we're going to talk about in a second. They're looking at both of those to determine if you've fully addressed and painted a picture of your program design. These are really the main elements that tell what I call your Ameri story, your story of your AmeriCorps program, also known as your program design and theory of change. So I know that can be confusing, and we'll walk through both elements, but both elements again are what are looked at to determine the overall point allocation that you get in the review process. So within the narrative part of this subsection, you're talking about what is the problem or problems that exist that make you think this AmeriCorps program is worth supporting. And in that, you're supposed to use data that's current and local, provide detailed summary of the community problem or set of problems or the environmental problem or problems. And then you're supposed to be communicating, what makes your program unique and talking about methods you've used to engage within the communities being served. Again, I'm using the criteria that's in the current formula RGA that was just released by Serve Washington for the current application opportunity you all may have the ability to apply for now, but these can vary depending upon the application. But essentially, the section's the same. You're really trying to paint a picture of what's going on that makes you think this AmeriCorps program is important. And Serve Washington's also asking you to talk about what makes your program unique and how have you engaged others in talking about what you're going to be doing with this AmeriCorps program. So along with this narrative, they're also looking at the logic model document, which is this 7-column document that includes all the elements you see here on the screen. Each of the seven columns is something you have to address. And I call the logic model a visual representation of your program design and your theory of change, because it communicates all of the moving parts that need to happen within the program and then what should be achieved over time as a result of that work, which is essentially your theory of change, your program design. I'm showing you a screenshot, 1 page, but you have up to 8 pages now to outline the details of your theory of change and program design. That's no longer really being communicated in the narrative. They're asking a lot about the problem stuff. Here is where you're giving that visual picture, reading from left to right about what your design looks like. I'm going to walk you through each of these columns and what should be contained within it. But really remember that details are important, that you have up to 8 pages for a reason now because all your details are really going into this document. Okay. I also want to say that with your logic model, it's important to consider what opportunities you have to tell the story of your AmeriCorps program. Don't just shy away from telling one piece of it. You can use your logic model to talk about the picture you have for both the community side of things or the environment side of things and the member side of things. If you choose, you can use this to talk about the get things done leg of the stool and also the member leg of the stool. And if you choose to talk about both of these areas, you can delineate them with like headings. And I'm going to show you an example so you can see what I'm talking about. eGrants doesn't allow for any bold, underline, italics, those kinds of things. But if you want something to stand out, I always all caps things. So put headings in like all capital letters so that it stands out and it's easier for the reviewers to read. So I'm going to talk you through each of these columns, and I'm going to show you how you could, for example, consider each of those 2 areas. So throughout, I'm going to show you a screenshot. You probably can't see all the details very well. You're going to get the PowerPoint slides afterwards in the recording, but I'm going to show you how in each column, or for most of the columns, they show the 2 really important areas of the program that they want to communicate. So you should, if you can squint your eye and look real close at the screen, see that there are 2 headings in a lot of the different columns: literacy interventions and member experience. You'll see it in each of the columns because this program is a literacy focused program, but also has a big focus on the member side of things. Okay, so we'll go throughout. So the first excuse me, the first column we're going to talk about is the problem column. that the first column you're going to see on the logic model document. It's important that applicants begin with a focused problem that shows the issues that are happening in the communities in which the members will specifically direct an intervention that helps to meet the problem. Excuse me, I had a cough. Ultimately, you must be able to, answer what's showing up as an issue that makes you think something needs to be done, what's happening that merits attention, what data do you have, what evidence do you have, and it really make sure that you focus on as current as possible. You may be thinking, this seems like the same thing I just did in the narrative, and it is, but it's important for you to restate it so that the readers, when they're looking from left to right, they really get a good sense of your program from this document. They should be able to go left to right and say, hey, I really get how all of this relates, and I see how this program is super important. So you'll see in this logic model example that we're providing that they have a couple of different things that they do to cite the problem. They have data that's focused on the literacy issue. They cite reading levels, assessment scores, and poverty data, all of which paints a picture of why this literacy AmeriCorps program is needed. What you don't see really well in this program, because it's kind of cut off, it is cut off, not kind of cut off, is that they also share data about high teacher turnover rate and the number of teacher positions that aren't filled each year, because that's going to tie in to what they're doing on the member side of things, because their goal is also, as a result of their program, to ensure that to hope that members go into the teaching or education field as a result of the things they do with the members. So following all the literacy and poverty data, they also have data on the teacher turnover rate and the inability to fill important teacher slots at the schools. Okay, we're going to skip the inputs column. We'll come to that last and talk about the activities column. That's the third column of the logic model document. In the logic model, this should be a very detailed description of the interventions you believe will help to move the needle along the problem or problems you laid out. Where you can, it's really important that you provide details on duration, dosage or intensity, frequency, and target population. You can't probably do that on everything that you lay out in your activities column, but those primary activities that members are going to be doing should have that level of specificity. So when we talk about duration, we mean the stretch of time the intervention will last. It's typically talked about in terms of like total number of weeks, total number of sessions, total number of months, number of semesters. When we talk about dosage or intensity, we mean the amount of time per individual or intervention, like number of minutes or hours per session. So you might talk about tutoring sessions are 45 minutes in length each session. When we talk about frequency, we're talking about the number of times your intervention will repeat and like a specific unit of time. So it could be 3 times per week or 2 times per month or daily. And then you have to talk about the target population, the group of people or the specific geographic area that will receive the intervention. Again, it's important to be as specific as possible. You might say, economically disadvantaged K through third graders who are performing below their literacy level, or 3 acres of land in North Cascades National Park. Like, be as specific as you can about that target group or space. And then you can also talk about the member side of things. Like, what are you going to specifically do to achieve the member outcomes you're hoping to see? For this program, again, it's kind of cut off so you can't see it. They're providing a really thorough orientation and training schedule that helps to develop these members to be literacy tutors and education advocates. They're also enrolling members in a fast track certification program that allows members to be fast-track certified as teachers if they choose to go in the teaching profession when they leave. And then, so you're seeing the example here of like how this program laid out the activities column. Again, you probably can't see all the details, but we'll send the slides out, so hopefully you can see them in bigger font. And then comes next, the outcomes column, the output column. So we're moving on to what I call the impact part of the logic model. And the first piece of that is the outputs. Outputs are what we call counts. They represent the number of people served, the number of services delivered, the number of projects completed, the number of acres addressed, and more. And at a minimum, you have to include your output performance measure. That's why I kind of put it in bold so you can see it. You can't do bold in eGrants, but I'm putting it in bold here so you can actually see that the first thing here is the applicant's output performance measure. But it's also important that you include all different kinds of counts you hope to achieve. My suggestion is that you all look at all the activities you've outlined in the column to the left and try to consider what other counts you might achieve for each of them and lay that out. Again, you're trying to paint the picture, the visual representation of your program design, your theory of change. And you don't have to count you don't have to put exact target numbers. So here again, I'm showing you what the output column looks like for this program. Again, you're going to notice the two sections, literacy interventions and member experience. The output performance measure is up top with the literacy intervention. But the other things you're going to notice don't have like an actual target number. They just say like number of literacy events implemented, number of volunteers recruited, number of members who successfully complete their year of service, number of members who complete teacher certification. You're not held accountable to anything you put in your logic model on the outputs and outcomes, except for your performance measures. But your goal of your output and outcome column is not just to show what measures you're picking, because your measures never truly tell the story of the full story of your AmeriCorps program. So you want to paint that picture of other counts you hope to achieve. If you know the numbers, feel free to put them. But if you don't, you're not comfortable sharing target numbers, you can just use some general language like the one you see here. And then the other part of the impact section is your outcomes, which in your logic model is divided into 3 columns, the short term, medium term, and long term. Outcomes are those expected changes you're hoping to see as a result of your program activities if you're wildly successful. And we talk about them in terms of these, 3 distinct words, short, medium, and long term. AmeriCorps defines each of these as different types of changes. So for short term, they're changes in knowledge, skills, attitudes, opinions. For medium term, they're changes in behavior or actions. And for long term, they're changes in condition or status in life. If you're an environmental program, these categories don't work neatly necessarily in these categories. If you're doing some education, it would, but if you're working on land, spaces, waterways, trails, these definitions don't apply. So you would think about them in terms of time frame, like short-term time frame, mid-term time frame, and long-term time frame. And then by clearly laying these out, you again paint a picture of if you're wildly successful with your AmeriCorps program, what you hope to see happen over time, your theory of change. This is an example of how this program outlined. Again, you're seeing the 2 sections, the literacy intervention category, and the member experience category. And you'll see that the performance measure for this program is in the short-term outcome column. So for this program, they're using ED5, which is the number of students with improved academic performance. Because that's a change in knowledge, they're putting it in the short-term outcome column. Because the definition of short-term, you can't really see it there, is changes in knowledge, skills, attitudes. It's also opinions. It's not listed there. So wherever your performance measure fits, it will fit in either the short-term or the midterm column. You'll need to put your performance measure on top, wherever it fits. So again, for this program, they put it in the short-term column. Okay. Excuse me. With all the other counts, you have the ability, or not other counts, with all the other outcomes, you have the ability to talk about all the other things you're hoping to see. It might be that the students can read more words per minute, that they show an increased interest in school, an increased interest in reading, improved report cards. You want to paint a picture of all the things you hope to achieve over time if you're successful. And again, they also have the member experience category. So you'll see in the beginning, they might want to see increased awareness of education and poverty challenges. And members indicate that they believe they have the power to influence and help address those challenges. And then they, continue to build out both member and literacy related outcomes in the mid and long-term section 2. And then the last column is the input column. And I say this for last because even though it's a second column in the logic model document, to me, I save it for last because it's like once you lay out all those other columns, it's all the things you want to put into the program for it to be successful. Like, what do you have to put into it so that all those other moving parts can be achieved? And when we talk about inputs, we're talking about resources, things that are essential for all those activities to occur and all those outputs and outcomes to be achieved. They can include any combination of things, human, financial, programmatic, organizational, community-based resources. They can include the things you see here, like AmeriCorps. They have to include AmeriCorps members and sites. We'll talk about that in a second. But they could also include program staff, funding, training curriculum you're going to use, maybe supervision you're going to provide, volunteers you're going to use, or research. There's an endless list. But at a minimum, you have to include information about your members and sites. You want to include the number and type of AmeriCorps members that are going to be delivering the intervention. There's also some new requirements around the characteristics of the AmeriCorps members, including any specific knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required to implement the intervention. And these could be things that you're hoping them to come with, or also things that you're hoping to train them in so that they will build and be able to do the activities you've outlined for them. And then you also need to include the site information, the number of sites, the names of sites or locations of sites. If you can list out all the sites, that's great. If you don't know all the sites, maybe you can talk about who they might be or geographically where they might be. And then you have to give some details about the context in which the intervention is being delivered. That could be the geographic area. It could be some poverty related data. It could be, about the type of organization that members are going to be serving in. There's a few different things you could talk about here. Ultimately, you need to think about, what partners do I need to engage with that could serve as sites and stakeholders? And then again, what will it take to support the AmeriCorps program I'm considering? And think about all the things that you have to do as an AmeriCorps program. What will you need to put into the program to make it successful? And here's the screenshot again of the sample logic model we're using, where they've laid out a few different areas of inputs. They've talked about the members, they've talked about the sites, they've put the staff that are going to be a part of the program, the site supervisors, curricula they're using, particular data systems they're using in training, and that teacher certification track. Now, the one thing that they didn't do, which I would say is an improvement area based upon the new criteria, is that in-depth information we just talked about. Go back to that slide with the characteristics of the members and the context. Okay. But it's a good sample to start from. And we talked about this in the first session, but I want to say it again for the two grant elements we've just talked about, then that narrative portion of that first subsection in the program design section and the logic model, they're similar in different areas in which the reviewer is going to score your application. Overall, with the narrative and the logic model, the reviewers are going to be looking on, did you address the criteria that was asked for? So it's really important that you read that with a critical eye, a detailed eye, and make sure you addressed all the basic criteria that they've asked for and provided really good details. For the logic model, they're going to also look at, does it read well left to right and right to left? If I read it from left to right, if I go backwards from right to left, does it all make sense? Does it paint a really good picture of what this program is hoping to do, their theory of change, their program design? Is it also plausible and reasonable? Are there any things that really cause me concern? Like, I don't really think this is doable, what they've outlined. And does it really convey that strong theory of change? And then I think overall, there's probably some questions that the reviewers, especially from Serve Washington, are going to look at. Does it provide, that required and requested detail? But also, are there any red flags? Anything that should be concerned around unallowable and prohibited activities? Are there any items that require some more clarification? And then ultimately, when they look at those two pieces, they're going to say, hey, is this a program we'd recommend for funding based upon what was provided? So it's really important that you give really serious consideration to those two elements as you start your grant application. And then there are other program design elements that are within the narrative in particular that also communicate your program design. So I want to talk through those, but I do want to pause and stop and see if there are any questions that you all have. I'm going to go and look in the chat. I don't see any that have been added, but do you all have any questions on the logic model document or that first subsection of program design? All right. So I'm going to talk about other areas that, while not directly asking about your theory of change and program design, are also opportunities for you to communicate pieces of your program design. Okay. So within that program design section that we talked about in the narrative, it's executive summary, program design, organizational capability, and budget and cost effectiveness. Within that section of program design, there's a few other subsections that communicate really important details about your program design and your theory of change. The first of which is called program development and evidence, where you're asked to talk about your program and its impact on the proposed community being served, or communities or environments, and how your program design is evidence-based or evidence-informed. All of this is, again, like communicating details about your theory of change and program design, particularly around your intervention and how it's evidence-informed or evidence-based. Evidence can come from many different sources, and this is a part also that I think intimidates organizations. But evidence can come from your own data. If you've existed as an AmeriCorps program, you can share your own data of your previous program years that show you have some likelihood of success. It could also be your own data of a pilot program you've run. So if you're new, or if you're an organization that's new to AmeriCorps, but maybe you've piloted this intervention or done this intervention on a smaller scale, you can use that data to show that your intervention is likely going to have some success. You can also use other people's data if they're doing a program that's like yours. You can use research in the field. If you have your own evaluation, you want to use that. if you have an evaluation from another organization that's like your program's intervention, you can use that too. The best evidence is your own evidence, but if you don't have your own evidence, you can use other people's evidence if you can show that, you're doing something similar. Um, but ultimately, this is a section that's asking you to communicate your program and its impact and how your program is likely going to have an impact because of the evidence that you are presenting to the reader. The next section is the member experience section, where you're asked to talk about a few different things. This is where you can address that member leg of the stool and go deeper maybe into some things that are going to help that member piece in your logic model play out more. They're wanting to know about a week in the life of a member. What's going to be like that day-to-day schedule looking like? And so some of that will be a repeat of what you had in your activities column. How they're going to gain skills and be leaders in their service that will be valuable to future employers. Your recruitment plan and how you're going to identify an applicant pool that's best suited to serve and do what you're asking them to do, and how you're going to create a supportive and safe environment for your members and stakeholders. Again, all this is painting a picture of your program design. It may not be in those first two elements we're talking about, but everything else from those first two elements helps to build the puzzle. It's like it's adding to the visual picture and the narrative that you started with, and adding more details that really tell the reader that you're a program that really has well thought out pieces to it. And then the next section is the member supervision section, where you can talk about how you're going to ensure that members have the support and guidance from their supervisors to provide the service that you're outlining for them. It goes beyond just that training, it's that ongoing support. And that could be a dual layered support from both the overall organization and the sites where the members are placed. And then ultimately, how you're going to train the people that are supervising the members so they're able to support the members and carry out what they're supposed to do. And then lastly, Serve Washington's really wants you to talk about how you're going to maintain strong communication lines and oversight so that everyone's on a similar page and doing what they're supposed to do. Again, this adds another layer of details about your program design that shows you have a well thought out program that will support the theory of change. Getting into that third section of the grant application, we talked, there's executive summary, a program design section, and an organizational capability section. Within organizational capability, there's a background and staffing section. And this is where you're going to be able to communicate the roles, the responsibilities, and structure of the staff that will help to implement and provide oversight to the program. And so you all need to think about, and this goes back to the inputs column of your logic model, what staff are going to be needed to support our AmeriCorps program? And this isn't just about like the day-to-day stuff, it's about the overall stuff, the human resources pieces, the member and site management, the data management, the fiscal and grants management. This is your opportunity to talk about all the people that will be helping to support the program and its success, and making sure that there's proper oversight and monitoring of the program. Again, another layer that's communicating your program design so that the reviewers can say with certainty that they believe your theory of change will be able to be realized because you have all these pieces in place. And then finally, the last piece I think that really communicates part of your program design is in the cost effectiveness and budget adequacy section. Jennifer is going to talk on a future session about the budget pieces, which also really your budget communicates your program design in also a real meaningful way. But there's also now narrative that you talk about in the narrative of your AmeriCorps application. that you need to highlight pieces around recruitment, retention, and data collection. And there's the final section of how your budget is in alignment to your whole program design. But I really want to talk about these specific areas because, again, these are places where you can talk about what you're going to put into the program to make your theory of change realize. So in terms of member recruitment, you're asked to talk about specific expenses that will help support the successful recruitment of AmeriCorps members that are best suited to do the activities you're asking them to do in the communities or environments in which you're asking them to serve. So this is your opportunity to talk about all the things you're going to put into the program in terms of expenses to get the members you need to carry out the activities you've asked them to carry out. The second piece is around retention. So what are those budget expenses that you're going to put into the program to support the successful retention of AmeriCorps members? Your theory of change will never be realized if you can't retain the AmeriCorps members in your program. So what are you going to put into the program to ensure members have a strong experience and stay in the program and complete their term of service and carry out all those activities successfully? And then finally, you're asked to talk about data collection in terms of budget expenses that will support anything related to data collection. It could be around your performance measures, it could be around other evidence building, around continuous improvement activities, it could be around evaluation of your program, and it could be both on the get things done side and the member experience side. So what are you going to do? And this is to me a huge part of program design and theory of change work because you want to make sure that you're collecting information to both show your success and to learn from your program each year in terms of what you can keep on doing that's working and then what can you do differently that based upon what you're learning that's not working. So all of these elements we just now talked about in this last section may not be directly related to the elements that communicate your theory of change, but they're all pieces that help to build out the puzzle that you're trying to put together. So by the end of your grant application, they should be able to look at all these elements and say they have a clear picture of your AmeriCorps program and all its moving parts so that they can say with certainty that your theory of change should be realized. So I'm going to stop here and see if you all have any questions. No questions in the chat. Okay. So just as we wrap up we're going to talk about a few final things as we wrap up this topic. And then again, we'll give one more time to answer questions. This is your chance to ask questions because the grant application is out and a lot of you all are on a tight time frame to work on these elements. I want to give you a few final reminders. So again, a reminder that the two main elements that communicate your Amera story or your program design or your theory of change, all these are used interchangeably, are that first subsection of the program design section in your narrative and your logic model document. Those two pieces together are read to determine if you successfully communicated your theory of change and as such get awarded the points that are a part allocated for that. Also, as a reminder, we said this in the last session, your grant is like your closet. Everything that's within it determines what is allowable. So it's really important that you make sure that you take several steps back and really assess what you want your program to look like in the next year. Because what's in your grant elements determines what you're able to do. And if it's not in your grant elements and reasonable based upon what's in your grant elements, you essentially aren't allowed to do it. So if you're a current AmeriCorps program, you could take a step back and look at what you've been doing this year. Is everything reflected in our AmeriCorps grant? Do we need to make some changes and do some things differently? based upon what we've learned this year and previous years, and and if you're a brand new applicant, this is your opportunity to really think about what you want this next year to look at, and make sure that when you read through all your elements, everything is represented as best as they can. Any final questions about any of that? Oh, there's a chat. Okay, great. I'm glad. Thanks, Michelle. All right. All right, just a few reminders. I want to talk about the opportunities you all have for additional support, and a reminder of the schedule of webinars we're doing. So you all have a few different resources that are available to you. AmeriCorps, the federal agency, has trainings on their website, or recordings of trainings that they've done. So if you wanted to look at recordings of trainings that AmeriCorps hosted for their funding opportunities, you could go to that. Some of the things they talk about might be different than what's in the Serve Washington current RGA that was just issued, but request for grant applications. But on some general topics, it could be helpful. You have these technical assistance webinars that are all being recorded that you can listen to again if there's some things you missed. You all also have access to On3Learn courses that are, there's both applicant and staff courses that you can take to help you with one or more of the grant elements. The applicant courses are very specific to the application itself. So there's a course on understanding the application narrative, on the logic model. Those are the topics we talked about today, but there are more that you see on the screen. We also have staff courses on the logic model and performance measures that take it a bit deeper than just the application itself. So you could take those too if you want to deepen your learning. And all of these are available to you free of cost. And then finally, we want to share with you the training calendar. This is our second session. Our third and fourth will be in March. Our third one will be about performance measures and evaluation, and our fourth one will be about budget nuts and bolts, both of which are before the deadline of the formula application, which is at the end of March. Not the exact end date of March, but towards the end of March. All right, so as we wrap up this session, this is your last and final chance to ask any questions you have for this topic. Otherwise, feel free to leave this session, and we hope to see you again on the next two sessions in March. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we still have time for Q&A.
Yeah.
If there is nothing, I can stop the recording. I'll give it just another minute before I do that.
Yeah.
Feel free to ask a question in the chat, or you are welcome to come off mute
Unmute your
and
mic.
ask your question. Okay, seeing and hearing nothing, I'll go ahead and stop the
Yeah.
recording.